Birth of the aircraft carrier. At the dawn of the 20th century, battleships were the undisputed kings of the seas, armed with massive guns and heavy armor. Yet a new invention was rising into relevance: the airplane. Small, fragile, and experimental, but with potential to change warfare forever. Early navies used ships to carry balloons and seaplanes for reconnaissance. By 1913, the Royal Navy converted the light cruiser Hermes to operate seaplanes, equipped with ramps, hangars, and cranes. But these aircraft could only take off. Recovery was still clumsy, often forcing pilots to land ashore or ditch in the water. The breakthrough came with the HMS Argus, launched in 1918. It was the world's first true aircraft carrier, featuring a full-length flat deck capable of both launching and recovering wheeled aircraft. It introduced critical innovations: arresting gear, onboard hangars, and stable hull designs to handle flight operations at sea. Another milestone was HMS Furious, converted in 1917. Initially built with partial decks, it was later modified into a full carrier, though turbulence and design flaws revealed just how difficult carrier aviation really was. The Argus entered service too late to see major combat in World War I, but it became a floating laboratory. Its trials shaped the techniques, procedures, and designs that all future aircraft carriers would inherit. A new era had begun. The sea would no longer be ruled only by guns, but also by wings. Aircraft carriers in World War II. If World War I was the experiment, World War II was the proof. Aircraft carriers went from curiosities to the decisive naval weapon of the age. By the late 1930s, every major navy, the US, Britain, Japan, had invested in carriers. Their advantage was clear. Aircraft could strike far beyond the range of any battleship's guns. This shift became undeniable on December 7, 1941, when Japan launched its surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. 6 carriers, operating hundreds of planes, crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet without a single battleship duel. Their names were Akagi, fleet carrier, flagship of Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo; Kaga, converted from a battleship hull, one of Japan's earliest carriers; Soryu, fast carrier with a relatively small air group; Hiryu, sister ship of Soryu, carried a similar complement of planes; Shokaku, modern fleet carrier, carried a large and powerful air group; Zuikaku, sister ship of Shokaku, also one of Japan's most modern carriers. The Pacific Theater became the arena where carriers ruled. At Coral Sea, 1942, the first naval battle fought entirely by aircraft. The opposing fleets never even saw each other. A month later, at Midway, American carriers dealt a decisive blow, sinking 4 Japanese fleet carriers and changing the course of the war. Britain, though stretched thin, pioneered armored flight decks that proved vital during operations in the Atlantic and Mediterranean. Meanwhile, Japan built powerful carriers like the Akagi and Kaga, but struggled to replace losses as the war dragged on. By 1945, the aircraft carrier had completely eclipsed the battleship. Even the mighty Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, was sunk by carrier-based aircraft before firing her main guns in combat. The lesson was clear. The future of naval warfare belonged not to floating gun platforms, but to floating airfields. American supercarriers. World War II proved the aircraft carrier's dominance, but the Cold War would transform it into something even larger: the supercarrier. After 1945, the United States emerged with an unmatched fleet of carriers and the industrial power to build bigger and more advanced ships. The first step was USS Forrestal, 1955, the world's first supercarrier. With angled flight decks, steam catapults, and armored elevators, it could handle the new generation of jet aircraft that were too fast and heavy for earlier carriers. Then came the leap to nuclear power. In 1961, USS Enterprise entered service, the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Its 8 reactors gave it essentially unlimited range and endurance, setting the standard for the future. By the 1970s, the Nimitz class became the backbone of American naval power. At over 1,000 feet long, displacing more than 100,000 tons, and carrying around 80 aircraft, these ships were floating cities at sea. Each required a crew of more than 5,000 sailors and aviators, projecting power across the globe. Unlike World War II carriers, which focused on sea battles, Cold War supercarriers became tools of strategic deterrence. They weren't just weapons against enemy fleets, they were political symbols, visible reminders that the U.S. could launch air power anywhere, anytime. The era of the supercarrier cemented the U.S. Navy as the dominant force on the world's oceans, a dominance that continues today. British carriers. Britain, the birthplace of the aircraft carrier, faced a different path after World War II. The Royal Navy no longer had the resources to rival America's supercarriers, but it refused to abandon carrier aviation. In the 1950s, Britain pioneered the angled flight deck and steam catapult, innovations later adopted worldwide. But as defense budgets shrank, the Royal Navy shifted toward smaller carriers. By the 1970s, it developed the Invincible class, ships optimized for helicopters, and a revolutionary new aircraft, the Harrier jump jet. The Harrier could take off on short runways or even vertically, allowing Britain to operate effective air wings from smaller carriers. To improve takeoff efficiency, the Royal Navy invented the ski jump ramp, a feature still used today by carriers in several navies. This gamble was tested in the Falklands War, 1982. With two Invincible-class carriers, HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible, the Royal Navy projected power 8,000 miles from home. Harriers, despite being outnumbered, scored decisive air-to-air victories against Argentine aircraft, proving the value of STOVL, short takeoff and vertical landing operations. While Britain's carriers were smaller than American giants, their innovations shaped global carrier design, and with the modern Queen Elizabeth class, the Royal Navy returned to large deck carriers, this time operating the stealthy F-35B Lightning II. Britain showed the world that naval aviation was not just about size, but about adaptability. Soviet and Russian carriers. While the United States built massive supercarriers, the Soviet Union followed a different philosophy. Rather than focusing solely on air power, Soviet designers created hybrid warships that combined features of both carriers and cruisers. The first step was the Kiev class in the 1970s. These ships carried a small air wing of vertical takeoff jets, Yak-38 Forger, and helicopters, but also bristled with heavy missiles and guns. They weren't designed to project power globally like U.S. carriers, but to defend the Soviet fleet and hunt American submarines. The Soviet flagship was the Admiral Kuznetsov, launched in 1985 and still in service today. Unlike American carriers, Kuznetsov uses a ski jump ramp instead of catapults, limiting the weight and range of its aircraft. It also carries long-range anti-ship missiles, making it as much a missile cruiser as a carrier. Russia planned a second, larger carrier, the Ulyanovsk, a nuclear-powered design closer to U.S. supercarriers, but the project was cancelled after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In modern times, Russia has struggled to maintain Kuznetsov. Mechanical failures, accidents, and even a sinking dry dock have kept it out of action for years, yet it remains a symbol of Moscow's ambition to field blue-water naval power, even if reality falls short of the image. Where the U.S. built carriers to dominate oceans, the Soviets built theirs to defend territory and challenge NATO. Two visions of naval power, one expansive, the other defensive. French carriers. France has always pursued its own independent path in naval aviation. After World War II, the French Navy relied on a mix of rebuilt U.S. and British carriers, but by the 1960s, it sought to design its own. This led to the Clemenceau-class carriers, commissioned in the 1960s, which gave France the ability to operate modern jet aircraft at sea. Compact but capable, they symbolized France's commitment to maintaining global influence. The real leap came with the Charles de Gaulle, commissioned in 2001. It is the only nuclear-powered aircraft carrier outside the United States, a remarkable achievement for a nation with far fewer resources. At 42,000 tons, it's smaller than American supercarriers, but still operates about 30 to 40 aircraft, including the Dassault Rafale M, France's naval strike fighter. The Charles de Gaulle also uses catabar operations, catapult-assisted takeoff but arrested recovery, the same system as U.S. carriers, giving it greater flexibility compared to ski jump carriers. Its nuclear propulsion allows for extended deployments, and it has taken part in operations from Afghanistan to the Middle East. France has plans for a successor, the PANG, Porte-Avions Nouvelle Génération, expected to enter service in the 2030s. Larger, nuclear-powered, and designed to operate future sixth-generation aircraft. It will ensure France remains Europe's premier carrier power. French carriers may not match U.S. numbers, but they project a clear message. France intends to remain a global military player, independent of NATO reliance. Chinese carriers. For decades, China had no true aircraft carriers, but in the 21st century, it transformed into one of the fastest-growing carrier powers in the world. It began in the 1990s, when China purchased the unfinished Soviet carrier Varyag from Ukraine. After years of refitting, it entered service in 2012 as the Liaoning, China's first operational carrier. Though largely a training ship, it signaled Beijing's ambition to join the elite club of carrier navies. In 2019, China launched its first domestically built carrier, the Shandong. Its role is to train crews, refine carrier operations, and expand China's naval reach. The real breakthrough came in 2022 with the Type 003 Fujian. This ship introduces EMALS, electromagnetic catapults, a technology previously fielded only by the U.S. Navy. With this system, Fujian can launch heavier aircraft, including early warning planes and future stealth fighters, putting China much closer to American carrier capability. Strategically, China's carriers are focused on the Western Pacific, particularly the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait. Unlike U.S. carriers, which roam globally, China's are regional power tools meant to secure dominance in Asia. With Fujian expected to enter full service later this decade and more carriers under construction, China is rapidly shifting from a continental power to a true maritime power. Indian carriers. India is one of the few nations to design and build its own aircraft carriers, making it a rare member of the Global Carrier Club. Its journey began in the 1960s when it acquired the INS Vikrant, a former British carrier, giving India its first experience with naval aviation. In 1987, India expanded its fleet with the INS Virat, another ex-British carrier, which served for nearly 30 years. Both ships operated Sea Harriers, short takeoff and vertical landing jets, using ski jump ramps similar to Britain's Invincible-class carriers. India's most important step came in 2013 with the INS Vikramaditya, a heavily modified Soviet Kiev-class carrier purchased from Russia. Converted to a ski jump design, it became India's flagship and the training ground for its carrier pilots. But the true milestone was the INS Vikrant, IAC-1, commissioned in 2022. This is India's first indigenous aircraft carrier, designed and built domestically. At 45,000 tons, it can operate up to 30 aircraft, including MiG-29K fighters and helicopters. Its construction marked India as the first Asian nation, after China, to design and build a carrier entirely on its own. India envisions carriers as central to its strategy in the Indian Ocean, where it competes for influence with China. With plans for even larger carriers in the future, India seeks to project power far beyond its shores. India's carrier program reflects ambition, from second-hand ships to a self-built fleet capable of regional dominance. Operation Ajax. After World War II, the Middle East became the center of the world's energy politics.